Can
Yeah.
you explain that
Yeah.
decision?
Excellent. That was the first. I would say that was the first um, the first strategic decision that is as close to an existential threat.
For people who don't know, it turned out to be, spoiler alert, one of the most incredibly brilliant decisions ever made by a company. So CUDA turned out to be an incredible foundation for computation in this AI infrastructure world. So
Thank you.
just setting the context, it turned out to be a good decision.
Yeah, it turned out to have been a good decision. I think here's the way it went. So we invented this thing called CUDA, and it expanded the aperture of applications that we can accelerate with our accelerator. The question is, how do we attract developers to CUDA? Because a computing platform is all about developers, and developers don't come to a computing platform just because it could perform something interesting. They come to a computing platform because the install base is large. Because a developer, like anybody else, wants to develop software that reaches a lot of people. So the install base is, in fact, the single most important part of an architecture. The architecture could attract enormous amounts of criticism. For example, no architecture has ever attracted more criticism than the x86. As a less than elegant architecture, but yet it is the defining architecture of today. It gives you an example that, in fact, so many RISC architectures, which were beautifully architected, incredibly well designed by some of the brightest computer scientists in the world, largely failed. And so I've given you two examples where one is elegant, the other one's barely aesthetic. And so yet x86 survived. And
Install base is everything.
Install base defines an architecture. Not everything else is secondary. Okay. And so there were other architectures at the time. CUDA came out, OpenCL was here. There's several other competing architectures. But the decision that we made that was good was we said, hey, look, ultimately it's about install base and what is the best way we could get a new computing architecture into the world. By that time frame, GeForce had become successful. We were already selling millions and millions of GeForce GPUs a year. And we said, we ought to put CUDA on GeForce and put it into every single PC, whether customers use it or not, and use it as a starting point of cultivating our install base. Meanwhile, we'll go and attract developers, and we went to universities and wrote books and taught classes and put CUDA everywhere. And eventually people would discover, and at the time, the PC was the primary computing vehicle. There was no cloud, and we could put a supercomputer in the hands of every researcher in school, every scientist, every engineer in school, every student in school, and eventually something amazing will happen. Well, the problem was CUDA increased our cost of that GPU, which is a consumer product, so tremendously, it completely consumed all of the company's gross profit dollars. And so at the time, the company was probably, worth, I don't know, at the time, $8 billion or something, like $6-7 billion or something like that. After we launched CUDA, I recognized that it was going to add so much cost, but it was something we believed in. Our market cap went down to like $1.5 billion. And so we were down there for a while, and we clawed our way back slowly, but we carried CUDA on GeForce. I always say that NVIDIA is the house that GeForce built, because it was GeForce that took CUDA out to everybody. Researchers, scientists, they discovered CUDA on GeForce because they were all, many of them were gamers. Many of them built their own PCs anyways. In a university lab, many of them built clusters themselves, using PC components. And so that, that's kind of how we got